Hello everybody and welcome. It's Fiona Timms here, otherwise known as White Zulu, and the author of 5 autobiographies. They are now all in video format and available on YouTube. I want to welcome you to the final couple of chapters from an autobiography I wrote when I was working at the Centre for Rehabilitation of Wildlife, otherwise known as CROW, in Yellowwood Park near the Steenbank Nature Reserve in Durban. I never got to finish this diary as I became too ill to continue writing, but I can give you the chapters I did complete. I'd also like to thank all you dedicated subscribers who post warm comments and give me such encouraging feedback. So sit back, relax, and enjoy another tale from the bushveld. This one is called Crow 1991 to 1997, the week-old baby white rhino, part 2. The little rhino calf was named Tholiwe, meaning something found. However, he nearly didn't make it. When he was first admitted at 1 week old, he didn't thrive, but got thinner and thinner and had constant watery diarrhea, which didn't look a good color at all. Added to that, his skin became very dry, pale, loose and chalky, and he was always ravenous but getting weaker and more listless. As I was his main carer, I kept ringing the Parks Board rangers explaining all this, but they said it was just mud that he needed, and they even sent down a Parks Board bakkie with a whole lot of Umfolozi red mud in the back. I want to explain how spooky it was, driving up to the rhino's enclosure every 2 hours all through the night in the pitch dark. There were no lights anywhere, and street lights were too far away to have any effect, so it was pitch dark. And that's why I chose to drive up rather than walk, as it was quite a long way and there was no fencing. Anyone could just stroll into all that thick bush. As I got out of my car at the clinic and walked up the steps to make his formula and fill his 2-litre bottles, I could hear the mournful hooting of the several species of owls we had in cages there. They often get hit by cars when they're perched on the roads at night, eating roadkill, and they get their wings broken. Along with that spine-chilling sound, there were the blood-curdling screams of the 2 lemurs who liked to howl at the moon. My torch was a cheap plastic one, the same one I took up to the Delta, and shed about as much light as a glowworm would. I had to feel my way up the steps, counting them as I couldn't see them, it was that dark. I had to do this every 2 hours and had barely crawled back onto my mattress, loaded with other baby animals, when the alarm rang again for another feed. Tholiwe's arrival attracted a lot of attention from the local press, particularly as that famous international rugby match was due to be played in Ellis Park soon, in front of our new co-president Mandela, and the whole Springbok team came to Crow to be photographed with all the staff, except me, posing with our little rhino. I was too busy getting all the baby birds fed while this was going on. And when the Springbok team members were shown the clinic, one of the younger nurses glanced in my direction and said casually about me, "Oh, she helped as well." I was very put out at this offhand remark, as I was the only one who'd been getting up every 2 hours every night to feed the little baby rhino while they went home. I still had to do my full 8-hour day in the clinic as well, so I was beyond exhaustion. I was still seriously worried about this peculiar formula, so I looked up the phone number for Daphne Sheldrick, a Kenyan woman who was well known for raising baby elephants and had raised a baby rhino. I rang her and she confirmed my suspicions that the formula was quite wrong and should be the other way round, 8 parts Denkovit and 2 parts glucose. I went to the temporary manager and explained this to her. She was horrified and made me promise not to ever mention a word of this potentially lethal botch-up, which would certainly have killed our baby rhino within a month. It would have made for very poor publicity if this amazing and endangered little animal died due to careless negligence. I swiftly changed the formula there and then and told the others nothing, as requested by the boss. The other 3 young nurses didn't seem too concerned and hadn't even noticed that there'd been such a massive increase in the calf mixture, an enormous reduction of the glucose. They were all too busy having fun by plastering mud all over him. After the change in this formula, he rapidly began to thrive. His stools became the right colour and a firm texture. He wasn't nearly so hungry all the time. He filled out, and his skin became perfectly smooth and healthy looking. He grew boisterous and playful, particularly when he saw his bottles arrive, and he charged full tilt towards the nurse, mainly me, who was carrying them. The 3 very young nurses loved all this attention as well, and spent most of the clinic time playing with him, slathering him in mud and generally having a wonderful time with the hose pipe, while I schlepped along now, carrying a lot more of the clinic work on my own shoulders, feeding and looking after all the other very young and vulnerable animals which had taken a back seat to the new arrival. And the girls fooled around, running a hosepipe over the little animal and making more and more mud, particularly when they had an audience, especially on open days, when the public was allowed in to see the animals, having paid a small fee, which was extremely necessary, as we had no funding except from the public. Even the previous government hadn't given us even 1 cent. His boma was built when he was about 3 months old and too big to be in the makeshift area near the mammal cages by the front entrance. A team of Parks Board officials came down from the Umfolozi Game Reserve, where he had been born during game capture, and built that boma directly in front of my hut over a long weekend. It was just about 10 yards away. Ever since the baby white rhino arrived, there was a lot of competition from the other 3 nurses. Naturally, since the others went home at 3 in the afternoon, having started at 7 in the morning, I carried on working in the clinic on my own. I began my shift at 9 a.m., allowing myself a very necessary lie-in, and always worked until 7 in the evening, when it was time to lock up. Then I fed the rhino, Tholiwe, all through the night, 2 2-litre Coke bottles filled with formula every 2 hours, round the clock. He'd come squealing joyfully to leap at me and suck both bottles flat within seconds. I just loved the little creature to bits. On Saturday, when the little rhino was in the peak of health, a TV crew from CNN arrived unexpectedly and unannounced at the Crow gates. I was on my own as the others had taken their day off. CNN had heard about our new baby and wanted to film me feeding him. We spent a happy hour while they filmed me giving him his bottles, running a hose pipe over him, which he loved, making some mud for him to roll in, and slathering it on him over the bits he couldn't reach, like his ears. We also played by chasing each other around the boma. CNN ran this 15-minute clip round the clock in between newscasts for months, and I was now dead meat. My colleagues and the temporary manager saw it, and they began to bully and persecute me. Since she had to walk past my hut each time she went to her house, the secretary would stick her head in my doorway and say something to the effect that there had been complaints about me from the volunteers and other such false accusations. I questioned her, asking for specifics so I could go and apologize to this volunteer, but she never gave them to me, so I assumed they were false allegations. She'd make a habit of dropping in just before I was going to bed and saying something derogatory about my work, upsetting me and ensuring that I couldn't sleep. It was calculated. They wanted me out. One of the young nurses had a best friend who desperately wanted my job. When they held the weekly staff meeting, they all falsely accused me of skipping the rhino feeds at night. In order to avoid the steps, I would fill in the feed book, which was kept in the clinic for some reason, for up to 8 feeds, then just go and feed him in his boma a few yards away every 2 hours. It did not make sense to me to drive all the way up to the clinic just to fill in the time of his feed, negotiating those 10 steep steps in the pitch dark and drive back. This was the last straw. I drove up to Pietermaritzburg to see the chief committee member and told them what was going on. 8 women who consist of our Zulu staff were stealing all the fruit and vegetables meant for the animals donated by the Muslims at the big Indian vegetable market just outside of Durban. I discovered this when we ran completely out of vegetables on a Saturday, and I had to go down and take the bakkie myself because I was, I had nothing to give them. And I was amazed that they pointed to a section in this massive market and said, help yourself. There were boxes of bananas, crates of tomatoes, huge boxes of avocado pears, so much fruit, and I loaded the bakkie right up to the top with all those vegetables. When the driver and women had finished with them, I'll carry on. Anyway, Crow had a driver and a bakkie with a canopy, and once a week on a Saturday, he would drive down to the Indian market and load it up to the roof with fruit and vegetables of every kind. Bananas, pawpaws, avocados, tomatoes, green mealies, lettuces, apples, pears, and every other delicious fruit or vegetable you can imagine. Even mangoes by the crate. They were put aside as they were not quite fit for sale, and the Muslims believe that they would be rewarded in heaven if they gave to charity. During the women's lunch hour, the driver would come back and park the laden vehicle in some bushes just outside the Crow grounds, and all 8 women would go along and strip the vehicle of its contents, leaving just a few spoiled apples and some hard pears. We actually had to buy in fruit for our animals. I would watch them come in the front gate empty-handed early in the morning, and when these women left in the afternoons via the lower gate on the property, each one had bulging supermarket bags in both hands and another one balanced on her head. They also stole all the knives we used for chopping up the fruit and vegetables into smaller pieces for the littlest animals and birds. I bought myself a hunting knife and hung it on my uniform belt in its own scabbard. I've still got it. The temporary manager kept forgetting that Sundays were open days, and we sold hot dogs to raise funds, and cool drinks to raise funds to keep the place going. Suddenly there would be a horde of people at the front gates waiting to be let in and given a tour of all the animals, usually by me. They paid for the tour and then bought food and drinks as well, and there was always a good turnout. This simple activity brought in several and much needed hundreds of rands each Sunday. It would be a mad scramble as the manager wasn't even there. She had a boyfriend in Durban and had spent the night with him, so one of us would have to rush out and buy the food and drink, and I would give a comprehensive tour, all the time pretending there was nothing wrong. Told the committee all this, and she was fired the next day. The committee then brought Chris Brown back in as manager, but by then I was so disillusioned and unhappy in my job. I had accepted the offer of relief camp manager of 2 camps in the heart of the Okavango Delta. So I left. That's it. And thank you for listening. Goodbye. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to my videos and my stories of my life. And I want to thank John Moslane for being what I call the sound engineer, but I'm sure there's a more professional word for it. However, faithful, and for 4 years now, I think, he has been here for me every Wednesday. Well, I think it's Wednesdays, but once a week to record 2 chapters of whichever book it is I'm reading. And without him, this couldn't be done. So a big thank you to John. Also, Sean van Vuren, we send the videos to him. Sorry, I'm not reading this. I'm just doing it off the cuff. And my brain is a bit Jumaka. And Sean uploads them to the YouTube channel where you can find them all in playlists. He does it beautifully. And I want to thank them both for all the help that they give me. Well, it's not help. They do everything for me. And it's a great asset. So also, I have a website called whitezulubook.com, obviously www in front of it, but you'll find it there. Quite easy to find. Johnny Clegg's called The White Zulu. Mine's called White Zulu. And you will find on my website, you'll find all kinds of photographs going way back to when my ancestors settled in the Cape, 1652. Well, not photographs of them, but descriptions. This photograph of my grandmother's wedding, and lovely lovely photos of the farm we still own. My sister sent me a photograph this morning of the farm in midsummer, and she says how beautiful it's looking. I've had a lot of rain. So, just want to thank my helpers, John and Sean, to thank you all for listening, and also please share this with everybody else. Hit the like button and enjoy. Goodbye.